Imagine a street where every home once cost as much as an entire factory. Marble staircases glinting under crystal chandeliers, private drivers waiting at every door. This was Detroit's Millionaire's Row, the crown jewel of wealth, where auto kings and financial magnates flaunted their fortunes. If you were born here, the city belonged to you. But today, look closely. The same facades that once reflected opulence now stand hollow, with shattered windows, scorched walls, and weeds reclaiming what wealth once built. A street that once hummed with jazz and laughter has become a corridor of burned-out mansions and forgotten dreams. Some call it the natural decline of a city, but the truth runs deeper. Beneath this darkness lies a story of greed, racial segregation, red-lined neighborhoods, and suspicious fires, fires that often began just when owners needed insurance payouts. This is not just a story about architecture. It is a story about the people who were pushed out, the fortunes built on their displacement, and the haunting silence left behind. And yet, among these ruins, a few houses still stand, their windows glowing faintly at night, as if someone, somewhere, is still guarding the secrets of Millionaire's Row.
This is what remains of Detroit's most famous stretch of wealth, a road where an address once meant you had already won. They move slowly. Jamal stops by an empty lot on the left. Weeds push through cracked concrete. A rusted chain-link fence leans precariously around nothing at all. This was the Henderson Mansion, he says. Built in 1895, 40 rooms, gone by 1978. The group murmurs, snapping photos of nothing, trying to capture the memory of a house that no longer exists. Across the street, light spills from a single building, warm, golden, inviting. Music drifts out, jazz or blues. The structure is massive stone and brick, restored to a careful, dignified shine. A small sign reads, "The Millionaire's Table." Once a timber baron's private palace, it is now a restaurant, but it survived. That one survived, Jamal says, his voice carrying both pride and exhaustion. A lifetime of telling this story has etched both wonder and sorrow into his tone. They continue north. The street widens, revealing empty lots between scattered mid-century buildings, a gas station, a storage facility, a shuttered clinic with peeling letters above the door. The architecture is chaotic, fragments of grandeur floating in a void, as if someone took scissors to history and left only scraps behind. At another fence, Jamal stops again. This one encloses a mansion, or the skeleton of one. 3 stories of stone, windows boarded with plywood, a sagging roof, graffiti climbing the lower walls. Yet the grandeur remains. Curved bay windows, carved stone flourishes, a silent proclamation of wealth too vast to explain. The Holbrook House, he says quietly, built in 1902, reportedly costing $200,000 at a time when factory workers earned $2 a day. He does not tell them the full story yet, how he grew up hearing whispers about this street, how his grandmother rode past these homes on her bus every morning to clean someone else's mansion, how his father brought him here as a boy, pointing to the houses and saying, "This was our Millionaire's Row. Detroit belonged to everyone, even if few could live here." The tour group snaps photos. Someone asks if the house is haunted. Jamal smiles, giving them the expected ghost story, the lumber king who wanders the halls searching for lost fortune. But the real ghost story is simpler. A street that forgot its wealth, a city that trained itself not to look. The tour ends near Jamal's car. People thank him, tuck phones into pockets, and drift toward their vehicles. Jamal checks his phone. 3 unread emails. The top one is from an unfamiliar city address. Subject line, Notice of Demolition Proposal, 4510 Woodward Avenue. He doesn't open it, not yet. He stares at the last mansion, the one that survived fires, foreclosures, and decades of neglect. Its silent presence presses against him. The phone vibrates again. The same email rises to the top, demanding attention. For the first time in years, Jamal wonders, is telling these stories enough? Or is it time to intervene, to stop the final chapter from being written? Each house tells a story. Some of them are about unimaginable wealth, extravagant parties, and lives lived above the rest of the city. Others tell darker tales, displacement, corruption, and neglect. Detroit's richest street, once a symbol of prosperity, now reflects the city's broader struggles, a mirror of inequality, urban decay, and forgotten promises.
Yet, amid the rubble, there is hope. Restoration projects, private initiatives, and the occasional glowing window suggest that memory, and perhaps justice, still lingers. The street may have fallen, but its stories continue to haunt, to inspire, and to remind us of what was lost and what could still be reclaimed. Detroit's Millionaire's Row is more than empty lots and abandoned walls. It is a lesson in history, wealth, greed, and resilience. And as long as people like Jamal walk its broken sidewalks, telling its stories, it will never be truly forgotten. To understand what Jamal sees when he stares at that abandoned mansion, you have to travel back in time, back to an era when Woodward Avenue wasn't a street of ghosts, but a street of arrivals. The year is 1990. Detroit is booming faster than almost any other American city. Wealth pours in from timber, iron, and the nascent automobile industry, a business that will soon reshape the world. And the men controlling that money need a way to show it off. They choose Woodward Avenue. The avenue is wide, lined with trees, close enough to downtown for convenience, but far enough away to escape the smoke and clamor. Land is still open. The city pushes north. This is where you build if you want the world to know, I have arrived. The first mansions rise quickly. Stone and brick, almost never wood. Wood is for ordinary houses. These buildings are meant to endure. They are designed to whisper across generations, my family will still be here when yours is forgotten. Among the earliest of these monumental homes is the Holbrook House, built in 1902. The foundation alone takes weeks of labor. Crews dig deep into Michigan clay, pour thick concrete, and set massive stone blocks by hand, using pulleys to lift them into place. The walls rise 3 stories high. Indiana limestone covers the facade. Marble from Vermont forms the grand staircase. Oak panels are carved by artisans for the library. Stained glass windows arrive in crates from Chicago. The budget reportedly exceeds $200,000. To put that in perspective, a skilled factory worker in Detroit earns around $600 a year. One single house costs roughly 30 times that annual wage. The owner, a man named Holbrook, his first name lost to incomplete records. His trade, automotive parts manufacturing. He's not the richest man on the street, not even close, but he is wealthy enough to stand among the elite. The house contains 40 rooms. A ballroom dominates the second floor. Servants' quarters fill the attic. A carriage house sits behind the mansion, soon adapted for automobiles rather than horses. Steam heat hums through the walls. Electric lights glow in every major room, a luxury when much of Detroit still relies on gas. And yet, this is just one of many. Up and down Woodward, similar projects march forward. The Wilson Mansion, the Crawford Estate, the Merrick House. Each one slightly larger, slightly more extravagant than the last. An extra bay window here, imported tile there, a longer driveway, a taller roof. Every addition a subtle declaration of wealth, a challenge to the neighbor. By 1915, the transformation is complete. Woodward Avenue, especially the stretch between Grand Boulevard and Milwaukee Street, is heralded as Michigan's most fashionable address. Horse-drawn carriages give way to Pierce Arrows and Packards. Garden parties spill onto manicured lawns. Winter galas send light dancing from every window onto the snow. If you live here, you have already won. If you are invited here, you matter. If you work here, that is another story entirely. This street is not merely pavement, it is a statement. Wealth gathered, displayed, and fiercely guarded. These mansions consume more coal and steam in one winter than most families earn in 5 years. Annual property taxes alone outstrip what laborers pay in rent for an entire year, and almost no one in these circles questions it. It is treated as natural. Detroit's factory and foundry owners are said to deserve palaces, their wives ballrooms, their children marble staircases, private tutors, and lives carefully insulated from the city's grit. The street becomes a symbol. When certain circles say Woodward Avenue, they do not mean the entire road. They mean this small stretch, Millionaire's Row, where the game is over before it even begins. What they do not discuss, and what the society pages never print, is who actually keeps these houses alive. That story belongs to other streets entirely. The labor, the invisible hands, the overlooked people who sustain wealth while remaining unseen. Woodward Avenue, at its peak, was more than a road. It was a stage, a red carpet rolled out for Detroit's elite, a place where power, money, and legacy were on full display. And yet, beneath the marble and stone, the story of its survival and eventual decline was already quietly being written. The mansions do not run themselves. Every morning, long before the sun rises, the streetcars begin to fill. They rattle north along Woodward Avenue, south from the neighborhoods where Detroit's working families actually live. Black families from the east side, Polish, German, and Irish immigrants from the west. Wooden benches are crowded, lunch pails balanced on laps, all heading toward homes they will never own. It is the same street, the same years, but an entirely different view. At the Holbrook mansion, the household staff slips in through the back entrance. A cook, 2 housemaids, a laundress who comes twice a week, a gardener, and a chauffeur who sleeps in a small room above the carriage house. The exact number shifts with the seasons and social calendar, but the rules never change. Wealthy families demand workers, and workers must remain invisible.
This is the unspoken architecture of Millionaire's Row. The grand staircases belonged to owners and guests. Narrow backstairs belonged to staff. Ballrooms gleamed under crystal chandeliers, while kitchens sweltered in summer heat. Marble entrances are designed to impress, while the servants' quarters under the roof have sloped ceilings, thin walls, and small windows that barely open. Pay is steady, but modest. A housemaid might earn $8 a week. The cook, if skilled, perhaps 12. They work 6 days, sometimes 7, during the height of the social season. They move through rooms filled with objects worth more than their families earn in an entire year, dusting furniture that costs what their families pay in rent for a decade. And yet, few complain. The job is safer than factory work, steadier than day labor, and, especially for black workers, one of the few paths to reliable income in a city where many employers refuse to hire them at all. But the line is rigid, clearly drawn. Jamal's grandmother recalled it years later, her tone even, matter-of-fact, free of bitterness, yet without illusions. She worked just a few streets away in the Boston Edison district, where automotive magnates built even larger estates. She knew girls who worked on Woodward. The rules were universal. You either worked there or you had no reason to be there. Those who worked on Woodward lived in neighborhoods with other names: Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, Hamtramck. Streets where homes were smaller, packed close together, often split into multiple units. Families shared kitchens and bathrooms. Rent devoured wages because options were scarce. These neighborhoods never appear in the society pages that glorify Millionaire's Row. The newspapers describe garden parties, debut balls, and winter galas. They do not mention who cooked the food, scrubbed the ballrooms afterward, pressed formal wear, polished silver, or stoked the coal furnaces through the bitter Michigan winters. This invisibility was not accidental, it was built into the system. The wealth displayed along Woodward rested on labor that had to remain unseen. The illusion of effortless prosperity only worked if the effort behind it remained hidden. By 1920, the pattern had hardened. Millionaire's Row was a stage set, polished, dazzling, perfect. The workers was stagehands, essential, invisible. The streetcars carried them in before dawn, away after dark, maintaining the illusion that wealth simply existed, needing only the hands of the elite. This arrangement would last for decades. The mansions would stand, the parties would continue, the streetcars would follow the same tracks. Yet beneath the surface, the ground was already shifting. Economic pressures and racial tensions were building, subtle but relentless. The street that looked so permanent, so solid, was far more fragile than anyone living there cared to admit. And when it finally broke, the workers would be among the first to pay the price. The tour is over. The street is quiet again. Jamal sits in his car, engine off. Dashboard light washes over his hands in a soft glow. He stares at his phone. The email is still there, unopened. The subject line hangs on the screen like a warning. Notice of demolition proposal, 45150 Woodward Avenue. He knows the address. It is the Holbrook House, the last mansion. His finger hovers over the screen. He has seen notices like this before, or at least heard of them in the preservation circles he drifts around. They are polite, bureaucratic, and quietly final. The language never changes, structurally unsound, prohibitively expensive to restore. Best use of the property requires removal of the existing structure. Translation in his head: we are tearing it down. He taps. The email opens. Jamal leans back in his seat, silent. He imagines the grand staircase, the marbled halls, the chandelier that had survived decades of dust and disuse. He recalls the stories his grandmother told, the invisible hands that polished the silver, lit the fires, and kept the mansion alive while remaining unseen. The mansion survived neglect, foreclosures, fires, and decades of abandonment. But now, even the last survivor of Millionaire's Row faces a threat it cannot ignore. Jamal feels the weight of history pressing against him, the ghosts of workers and owners, of triumph and loss, converging in one moment. The email vibrates again, nudging its way to the top of his inbox. He does not move. He knows that opening it is not just an act of curiosity, it is a decision, a choice about whether a story will end in memory or in rubble. For the first time in years of leading these tours, Jamal wonders, is telling stories of loss enough? Or is it finally time to intervene, to try and stop the ending from being written? The message is short. A demolition proposal has been filed by a company called Great Lakes Storage Solutions. The structure at 4510 Woodward Avenue, the Holbrook Mansion, has been deemed unsafe. A public comment period will remain open for 30 days. Renderings of the proposed replacement are attached. Jamal opens the first attachment. Glass and steel, clean lines, a modern self-storage facility, 4 stories tall, climate-controlled units, 24-hour access. The building is rendered at dusk, every corridor softly lit. Handsome in that efficient, polished way modern commercial boxes can be. Professional, neutral, completely disconnected from anything around it. And the Holbrook mansion is gone. Not a trace, not even a shadow. Just paved over, erased, replaced by something that could exist anywhere, yet nowhere in particular. Yet his thumb hovers over the screen, already tapping the call button. The phone rings once, twice. A woman answers. Preservation Alliance, this is Maria. Jamal inhales. Hi, my name is Jamal Williams. I lead historical tours on Woodward Avenue. I just received a demolition notice for 4510 Woodward, and I don't know, I think maybe I want to do something about it. A pause, then, can you come to our office tomorrow morning? Yes, he says, I can. The office is smaller than Jamal expected. 1 room on the 2nd floor of an old commercial building near Eastern Market. Exposed brick walls, framed photographs of mansions, theaters, churches, some already gone, others barely hanging on. A worn conference table, mismatched chairs, file boxes stacked in the corner, labeled by neighborhood, Brush Park, Corktown, Boston Edison, Woodward Corridor. 2 people wait for him. The first is older, perhaps 70, silver hair pulled back in a careful bun. She reaches out her hand. Catherine Moore, I've been leading preservation tours since 1983. The second is younger, early 30s, in practical business attire. Her eyes are tired from long hours, the type of exhaustion that comes from doing meaningful work for little recognition or money. Maria Chen, I'm a volunteer attorney. I help with the legal side when we can afford to fight. Catherine pours coffee from a thermos into paper cups. The small act feels like ceremony, a little kindness before the hard news. Tell us about the Holbrook house, Catherine says. Jamal explains what he knows. Built in 1902, the original owner made parts for the rising auto industry. 40 rooms, steam heat, electric lights in every major room, a grand staircase of Vermont marble, oak-paneled libraries, stained glass windows imported from Chicago. The mansion was emblematic of Woodward Avenue at its peak, a symbol of wealth and ambition. He tells them about its history, the social rituals, the invisible workers who kept it alive, and the decline that followed decades later, about fires, foreclosures, and the ghosts of a street that once belonged to the city in spirit, if not in access.
Catherine and Maria listen, not just hearing, but weighing every detail, connecting dots, preparing for the fight ahead. This is what keeps historic neighborhoods alive, the people willing to step into bureaucracies, confront developers, and advocate for memory, beauty, and heritage. Because once a place like Holbrook is gone, it is gone forever. Around 40 rooms, a limestone facade, a grand marble staircase, empty since the late 1980s, boarded up, slowly decaying, but still commanding, still powerful. The last surviving mansion on this stretch of Woodward Avenue. And now, Great Lakes Storage wants it gone. Maria Chen leans over her laptop. They bought the property 6 months ago, she says, paid cash. They're moving fast. Can we stop them? Jamal asks, his voice barely above a whisper. The 2 women share a glance. It is not hopeless, but it is not rosy either. It is practiced realism. Maybe, Catherine Moore says slowly, the real question is whether we can make the fight costly enough that they start looking for other options. She spreads a map across the table. Detroit has some historic districts with real protection, where demolitions need special approval and community voices carry weight. Boston Edison, parts of Indian Village, the Woodward Corridor near the Detroit Institute of Arts. But 45510 Woodward? Asks Jamal. That mansion sits just outside that shield, Maria adds. Not an accident. Those historic district lines were drawn decades ago, when these houses were already in trouble. The area was already mostly black and poor. Saving them was never on anyone's list. So we have no legal leverage? Jamal presses. Not much, Maria admits. We can file objections during the comment period. We can try to pull in media, stir public pressure if we can prove the building has special historic value.
We might slow them down long enough to find a different buyer, but that's a long shot. Catherine leans forward, elbows on the table. Here's what 40 years of preservation work has taught me. You can't save everything. Sometimes you lose even when you do everything right. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you make enough noise that developers decide it's easier to work with you than against you. She nods toward a photograph on the wall. A tall Victorian mansion, perfectly restored, now a small hotel. We lost 12 houses on that block, she says. We saved one. And that one matters. People get married there every weekend. Families bring their kids. It's still standing because a few stubborn people refused to let it vanish quietly. Jamal studies the photograph, then the boxes of files, then the two women who keep showing up, swinging against the odds, knowing how often the answer is no. What do I need to do? He asks. Maria slides a sheet of paper across the table. Start with this. It's a formal objection to the demolition. Sign it. We'll file it tomorrow. Jamal reads it quickly. The legal language is dense, but the heart is clear. This building matters. This history matters. This loss is not inevitable. He writes his name at the bottom, a small gesture, a tiny signature, yet at the same time enormous. His first step into a fight he may not win, but for the first time in years, he is not only telling stories about what has already disappeared, he is trying to stop the next eraser before it hits. The objection is filed. The waiting begins. Jamal spends more time in archives than on the street. The main branch of the Detroit Public Library, the Burton Historical Collection, the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State. He is searching for ammunition, photographs, documents, maps, anything to prove the Holbrook mansion is worth saving. Instead, he sees more clearly what has already been lost. At a microfilm reader, he scrolls through old city directories and Sanborn fire insurance maps. The maps are precise, color-coded, showing every building's footprint, construction material, and height. He finds Woodward Avenue as it looked in 1910. The density is startling, block after block of large houses. Holbrook's mansion is marked in pink for brick construction, 3 stories tall, detached, surrounded by similar mansions. To the south, the Henderson Place. To the north, the Wilson Estate. Across the street, the Crawford Mansion, each labeled, each standing in silent testimony to wealth and ambition. He pulls out his tablet, opens a modern satellite view, and holds it beside the glowing microfilm screen. More than half the mansions are gone, simply gone, replaced by parking lots, gas stations, empty parcels overgrown with sumac and Atlantis trees. A few mid-century commercial boxes now look tired, out of place, almost desperate. He photographs the comparison and sends it to Catherine and Maria. Catherine replies almost immediately, "This is what we're fighting, not just one house, the systematic erasure of an entire streetscape." Jamal keeps digging. Society pages from the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News reveal predictable coverage, gala announcements, debutante balls, detailed lists of attendees, flowery, eager-to-please prose, journalism built to flatter the wealthy. But between the lines, he sees the shape of a world once vibrant with power and influence. A winter reception at the Holbrook Mansion, December 1912, around 200 guests, music by a 12-piece orchestra, dinner served at midnight. The article lists the important names, automotive executives, banking dynasties, the mayor, a visiting state senator. These were not just rich people, they were the people who ran Detroit. The street once concentrated power in these homes.
Decisions made over brandy and private libraries, access tightly controlled. If you lived here, you helped shape the city. If you did not, you lived within the results of those choices.
Jamal finds architectural surveys from the 1970s when a few preservationists tried to record what remained. By then, many mansions had already been demolished or chopped into offices and boarding houses. Woodward Avenue, once a continuous ribbon of wealth, had been cut apart, rewritten, and largely erased. Yet even in fragments, the stories persist. The Holbrook mansion remains, stubborn and solitary. And for Jamal, the fight is no longer abstract. It is tangible, immediate, and personal. He is no longer simply a guide narrating losses to visitors. He is a participant, a witness willing to push back against erasure, to demand that memory, beauty, and history have a chance to survive in a city that has too often forgotten its own past. Every photograph, every map, every society page becomes ammunition. Every signature, every public comment, every story shared is a step toward resistance. And for the first time in years, he feels the weight of history and the possibility of shaping it, even if the odds remain stacked against him. The Holbrook house was still residential, though split into apartments. Survey notes describe deterioration, deferred maintenance, but also significant architectural integrity. One of the finest remaining examples of turn-of-the-century residential architecture on Woodward Avenue. 40 years ago, someone believed it was worth saving, and here it still stands, just barely. Jamal leans back in his chair. Around him, other researchers move quietly, students hunched over laptops, genealogists studying census records, historians scribbling notes in notebooks. The library is warm, late afternoon light filtering through tall windows, pooling across tables. He thinks about his tours, about standing in front of bare lots, saying, "This is where the Henderson mansion stood." How abstract that feels. A name, a date, a house that might as well be made up because most people cannot picture it anymore. But these maps, these photographs, they make it concrete. They show the scale of what Detroit chose to let slip away, not through some unstoppable natural process, but through decisions made by specific people who decided that parking lots were more valuable than palaces, that storage units mattered more than memory.
His phone buzzes. A text from Maria. "Can you meet tomorrow? We need to talk strategy. Developer pushing for expedited approval." Jamal types back, "I'll be there." He saves his images, gathers his notes, and steps out into the cooling evening. The fight is only beginning, and already he can feel how easy it would be to lose. Yet his mind keeps circling those maps, the thick pattern of rooftops that once lined this road, a street that used to be whole. Maybe that picture alone is worth fighting for. Even if he loses, even if all he manages is to make the loss impossible to ignore. To understand what happened to the street, you have to understand who lived there. The historical record is patchy. The Holbrook name appears in city directories, property files, but the family left almost nothing personal behind. No diaries, no stacks of letters, only fragments, a marriage notice here, a business filing there, a brief line in a society column. So Jamal does what historians sometimes must do. He builds a composite. He folds together documented patterns of similar families on similar streets, creating one representative life. The Holbrooks become a useful fiction, stitched together from real patterns. Call the patriarch Robert Holbrook. He arrives in Detroit in the 1880s, an engineer trained in Massachusetts, pulled west for opportunity. He starts as a designer at one of the early automotive parts companies. The industry is young, messy, wide open. Robert is good at his job. He patents a modest improvement to a transmission system. It does not change the world, but it works. His factory adopts it. Then others follow.
royalties begin to arrive. By 1900, he owns a share of the company. By 1902, he is wealthy enough to commission a mansion on Woodward Avenue, not the largest house on the street, but substantial, around 40 rooms, modern systems, enough space for a growing family. He and his wife already have 3 children, with a 4th on the way.
This rhythm repeats across the archives. First generation earns the fortune. Second generation inherits it. The mansion is physical proof of arrival, of crossing into Detroit's ruling class. Jamal imagines daily life inside those walls, not just the formal evenings captured in newspapers, but the private rhythms. Children sliding down the marble banister when no one is watching, the cook laboring in the hot basement kitchen, the chauffeur polishing the Packard in the carriage house. Winter mornings when condensation fogs the tall panes. Summer evenings with coffee on the terrace, watching the street hum below. These details exist nowhere in writing, but they are reasonable guesses. Wealthy families lived in patterns, and the house shaped those patterns. Servants' labor made their comfort possible. Robert Holbrook likely assumed the house would stand for generations, that his children and their children would move through the same rooms, that the street itself would remain unchanged, a fixed monument to success. But economics do not honor assumptions. By the 1920s, the auto industry consolidates. Smaller firms swallowed by larger ones. Competition grows brutal. Some families grow richer, others hold steady. A few begin slipping from wealth to comfortable, from comfortable to stretched. In Jamal's reconstruction, the Holbrooks land in that middle group, still affluent but no longer ascending. Their money sits in a business slowly being left behind as the industry matures. Children grow older. The eldest son enters the company but lacks his father's engineering acumen. Daughters marry and leave, one to New York, one to Chicago. The house begins to feel oversized for the remaining family. This too is a familiar pattern. Second-generation heirs inherit assets, but not the hunger that built them. They maintain, but they do not create.
By the 1930s, Robert Holbrook is aging. The Depression hits. His company survives, but profits shrink. The mansion becomes a financial weight. Property taxes remain high. Heating a 3-story stone house through Michigan winters costs real money. Staff wages must be paid. Other Woodward families feel the same pressure. Some sell and move to new, fashionable suburbs. Others convert houses into offices, boarding houses, or private clubs. Jamal scrolls through the records, noting how each house tells the same story: the rise, the peak, and then the slow, inexorable erosion. A street that once represented concentrated power, wealth, and influence gradually fragments, both physically and socially. He leans back and imagines the Holbrook children in those rooms, the laughter, the whispered secrets, the daily rituals repeated for decades. And he imagines what happens when the patterns break. The families depart, the staff leave, the structure decays. The street slowly becomes a collection of fragments, empty lots, and memories, waiting for a bulldozer to make the final edit. It is a pattern repeated across Detroit, across America. Wealth and labor, legacy and memory, ambition and neglect. One mansion stands at 4510 Woodward, just barely holding on, but it is enough to anchor the story, to connect the past with the present. And for Jamal, it is clear, understanding this street, understanding the Holbrooks, understanding the people who built, maintained, and ultimately abandoned these houses, is not just about nostalgia. It is about the stakes in the present, about the preservation fight, about what it means to resist erasure,
about whether history and the streets themselves can survive choices made today.
Because even one house, stubborn and solitary, can remind a city of what it almost lost. And sometimes, that is enough to ignite a fight worth fighting. The street begins its slow change, not collapse yet, but the first cracks in the idea that this world is permanent. Jamal flips through his notes, staring at the imagined Holbrook family he has stitched from fragments in city directories, property files, and society columns. The family itself is fiction, a composite built from documented trends. But their arc, the rise, the plateau, the slow decline, mirrors dozens of real families who built these mansions expecting them to last forever, only to see the conditions that made them possible vanish. For the moment, the houses remain, facades still stand, marble still glows under the fading sun. But the world that created them is already slipping away. And what comes next for Millionaire's Row will be harsher than anyone in those grand parlors could have imagined. To understand how the street begins its unraveling, you have to understand redlining. Jamal finds the maps in a National Archives digital collection. They were drawn in the 1930s by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency tasked with measuring mortgage risk across American cities. Each neighborhood is color-coded, green for the best, blue for still desirable, yellow for definitely declining, red for hazardous. Detroit's map looks like a patchwork quilt sewn by someone with very firm ideas about who deserves investment. Wealthy northern suburbs glow green: Grosse Pointe, Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills. These are places where banks write mortgages eagerly, where property values are expected to climb, where the future is literally labeled secure.
Most of Detroit, however, is yellow or red. Neighborhoods with significant black populations are almost always marked hazardous, regardless of the condition of the houses themselves. The written assessments are blunt, even shocking. Infiltration of Negroes or threat of Negro encroachment. This is not hidden. This is official policy. Woodward Avenue runs like a spine through the map. The stretch where the Holbrook mansion stands is shaded yellow, declining but not yet hazardous. The notes mention large, older homes, conversion to apartments, and changing character of the area. The effect is immediate and structural. Banks will not issue normal mortgages in red districts. Even in yellow zones, they are wary. Buyers need cash, or they accept predatory contracts with high interest, short repayment windows, balloon payments designed to make default feel almost inevitable. Meanwhile, the suburbs explode with growth. The Federal Housing Administration guarantees loans for new houses in white areas. Developers carve entire subdivisions out of farmland with written promises that homes will never be sold to black families. The deeds carry racial covenants. The wealthy families along Woodward begin to leave, not in a sudden stampede, but in a steady, almost imperceptible drift. They sell their mansions and move to Grosse Pointe or Bloomfield Hills, where the houses are newer, the lots wider, the neighbors guaranteed to look like them. In Jamal's reconstruction, the Holbrook family clings longer than most. Robert dies in 1938. His widow remains in the house with their youngest son. The building, vast and 3 stories tall, is now far too large for 2 people. Half the rooms remain closed. The staff shrinks to a single housekeeper who visits 3 times a week. By 1945, the son inherits. He works as a middle manager at an automotive supplier. Comfortable, but no longer truly wealthy. The house has become a weight. Property taxes climb. The roof needs constant repairs. The old heating system demands care. He makes a practical choice: chop the mansion into apartments. The ballroom on the 2nd floor becomes 2 units. The former servants' rooms under the eaves become another 2. The grand rooms on the 1st floor are subdivided again. 5 apartments, maybe 6. The marble staircase remains. The carved oak panels endure, but the meaning of the place has shifted.
No longer a single-family palace, it becomes a rooming house for people who cannot afford or cannot access other housing. Other Woodward mansions follow similar paths. Some turn into offices for doctors, dentists, lawyers. Some are sold to churches or fraternal lodges. A few sit empty, too costly to maintain, too hard to sell. The street's character splinters. Where there was once a uniform world, wealth, whiteness, concentrated power, there is now a mix, working-class families, black families moving into areas that once shut them out, small businesses, apartments carved into grandeur, the demographic shift that the redlining maps both predicted and enforced. This is the mechanism at work. Not vague urban decline, not random decay. Specific policies, documented in lines and colors, channel investment away from some neighborhoods and toward others. Woodward Avenue, Millionaire's Row, lands on the wrong side of those lines. The mansions still stand, but the money that might have cared for them flows elsewhere, to subdivisions in former cornfields, to fresh houses in places banks actually lend. The street begins to die, not because it is old, but because it has been marked for death. And the worst is yet to come.
The maps set the pattern. The 1960s rip it open. This is the period Jamal approaches most carefully. The history is close enough to sting. His grandmother lived through it. His father was a child during the worst years. The scars are still etched into the streets, into the people who stayed. The breaking point comes in July 1967. Detroit explodes. Jamal does not linger on the flames, the looting, or the immediate violence. That story has been told elsewhere, often badly, with more interest in burning buildings than causes. What matters for Woodward Avenue is what comes after. The wealthy who had lingered, the families who had held on to old fortunes, leave in waves. Some sell and flee immediately, others gradually drift, unable to maintain the old lifestyle in a changing city. The Holbrook mansion, even split into apartments, feels the pressure. Deferred maintenance accelerates. Empty units invite decay. Windows crack. Roofs leak. The same houses that survived generations of wealth now begin a slow, steady decline. Fire becomes both literal and metaphorical. Some are accidental. Some are suspicious. Fires that conveniently appear when insurance might cover losses. Policies and profit intertwine. The street is hollowed out. Graffiti blooms on boarded windows. Gardens vanish, replaced by weeds. The grandeur fades into silence. Yet even amid this decay, a few houses remain. Stubborn, silent, as if guarding secrets no one dares speak aloud. Woodward Avenue becomes a corridor of contradictions. Grandeur and ruin. Memory and erasure. Wealth remembered only in photographs and fragments, poverty and labor visible in ways that the society pages never recorded. Jamal looks at the maps, at the red and yellow zones, at the skeletal footprints of mansions on microfilm, lines on a page, policies on paper, but real consequences in brick and stone, in human lives, in the slow dismantling of a street that once defined a city.
The story of Millionaire's Row is not just loss. It is intentional. It is shaped. And for Jamal, understanding that is the first step toward remembering, and maybe, one day, preserving the history that still stands, however fragile, on the spine of Woodward Avenue. Already existing trends on Woodward Avenue suddenly shift into fast forward. White flight turns into white evacuation. Families who had been thinking about leaving, the ones who could, leave all at once. Those who plan to stay reconsider everything. The suburbs promise safety, they tell themselves, better schools, newer roads and sewers. They rarely say race out loud, but race is embedded in every choice, every conversation. The businesses follow the families. Factories close or move to industrial parks along the freeways. Retail shifts to new shopping centers just beyond the city line. The tax base erodes. City services weaken. Cuts make life worse. and worsening conditions give more people reason to leave. This pattern is not unique to Detroit. Versions of it played out in Chicago, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and beyond. But Detroit feels it more sharply because the local economy leans so heavily on a single industry, the automobile, and that industry is spreading outward, chasing lower costs, automating plants, and discarding workers who had once been its backbone. The Holbrook mansion, still divided into apartments, begins to falter. By 1970, only 2 units remain occupied. The son of the original Holbrook, now owner, can no longer keep up. The roof leaks. The aging heating system falters. He patches what he can, but the house is always one step ahead. In 1973, he sells. The buyer is a real estate speculator, collecting distressed properties along Woodward Avenue. The strategy is simple on paper: hold until the market rebounds. Maybe convert the buildings to offices. Maybe clear the lots for redevelopment. The rebound never comes. The mansion is sliced even further. Big rooms turn into single rentals. The marble staircase, once polished weekly, goes years without care. Carved oak panels are smothered in cheap latex paint. Stained glass windows, too costly to maintain, are removed and replaced with plain panes. One breaks and is covered with plywood that never comes off. This is not an isolated story. Up and down Woodward, the same pattern repeats. The Henderson mansion becomes a clinic, then closes. The Wilson estate turns into a nursing home, shuttered when money runs dry. The Crawford house sits empty for years, then burns in a suspicious fire. The owner had been trying to sell for ages, and suddenly insurance money replaces an unsellable shell. By 1980, what was once Millionaire's Row is almost unrecognizable. Roughly half the mansions are gone, replaced by surface parking lots or scrubby vacant lots. The survivors stand in various stages of decay. Only one, the old timber baron's palace, has been rescued, restored, and turned into a restaurant that still glows at night. The Holbrook mansion survives, but just barely. It passes through several hands. Each buyer arrives cheap, hoping for a turnaround that never comes. The structure holds. Those 1904 foundations were built to last, but everything above them frays. By 1987, the building is empty. The last tenants move out. Windows are boarded for security. Years stretch on. Graffiti creeps across the lower walls. Children squeeze through a broken basement window. Someone lights a small fire on the second floor. It dies before spreading, leaving black scars across the ceiling. The city talks about demolition more than once, but the mansion is never damaged enough to qualify as an emergency, and with no funds for anything non-urgent, the house just sits, a monument to neglect, a palazzo slowly turning to ruin.
This is what Jamal points to on his tours. Not just a single deserted house, but the endpoint of decades of policy, economic shifts, and deliberate choices about whose neighborhoods are worth saving and whose are not. A street built to look eternal lasts barely 80 years before it truly begins to die. And now, with one email and one demolition proposal, someone is trying to finish the job. Jamal transforms research into action. He gathers everything into a single, clear presentation. Historic photographs of Woodward Avenue at its peak, architectural surveys from the 1970s, which note the Holbrook House as one of the finest remaining turn-of-the-century mansions on the corridor. Redlining maps layered over modern satellite images to show how policy pushed the street into decline. Before and after shots of the entire block. He uploads it all to a simple website. At the top, a petition. Then he writes the description himself, channeling Catherine's calm, measured style, while still speaking plainly to anyone who cares about the city. This was the richest street in Detroit. Now only one mansion survives on this block. Should we let it die, or give it one more chance? He shares the link on social media, posts it in local history groups, and emails it to preservation organizations across Michigan. The response is immediate. Within 48 hours, the petition gathers 3,000 signatures. A local TV station runs a 2-minute story in the evening news. Drone footage of the boarded-up mansion cross-cut with archival images of its golden era. A Detroit Free Press columnist writes about the quiet erasure of architectural heritage.
Then, History TikTok notices someone uses Jamal's images to create a short, sliding then and now video set to melancholy music. 500,000 views, then 1 million. What hits Jamal hardest are the comments. They come not just from Detroit, but from Cleveland, Buffalo, St. Louis, Pittsburgh. People in other Rust Belt cities see their own streets in this story. Architecture students weigh in. Descendants of families who once lived along Woodward write, "My great-grandmother cleaned houses on this street. She always said they were the most beautiful buildings she'd ever seen. It broke her heart when they started coming down." The petition climbs to 10,000, then 15,000 signatures. The numbers feel unreal. Maria calls. "We're getting attention. That's good. But attention alone isn't enough. We need a concrete plan." 2 days later, the plan comes from an unexpected source. A local developer, Marcus Chen, contacts them through the Preservation Alliance. For the past decade, he has been buying struggling historic buildings in Detroit and converting them into mixed-use spaces. Modest apartments, artist studios, small retail on the ground floor. Not flashy, but practical. Not chasing giant paydays, but reviving run-down blocks. They meet at a coffee shop near the Detroit Institute of Arts. Marcus is younger than Jamal expected, maybe around 40, dressed casually, carrying a worn leather portfolio. "I've been watching that building for years," he says. "I looked at buying it twice, but the numbers never made sense." Jamal studies him, thinking of the boarded-up windows, the black stained ceilings, the slowly crumbling marble staircase. This is the house that survived policies, speculation, fires, and decades of neglect. The one that carries the memory of the city's wealth and the hidden labor that kept it running. "I think it's finally possible to save it," Marcus continues. "Not as a mansion for a single family, not as a private palace, but as something alive again. People living, working, creating, bringing life back to this block." For the first time in years, Jamal feels the weight shift. Preservation is not just about telling stories anymore. It is about making the next chapter real. About proving that history does not have to be erased simply because it is inconvenient or expensive. The Holbrook House, the last survivor of Woodward's golden age, may finally have a future. But it will take more than nostalgia. It will take action, persistence, and a community willing to fight for what remains. Jamal leaves the coffee shop with a folder full of documents and a heart full of cautious hope. Outside, Woodward Avenue stretches ahead. Cracked, overgrown, a corridor of ghosts and possibilities. The mansion waits, silent yet defiant, its story far from finished. Too much deferred maintenance, too much risk. Marcus Chen's words hang in the coffee shop air. Jamal leans back, absorbing the reality. And now, with public interest swelling, Marcus continues people actually care, and that changes everything. He opens his worn leather portfolio, spreading sketches across the table. "Adaptive reuse," he explains. "The exterior stays. Major interior features, marble staircases, oak paneling, stained glass, are preserved. Upper floors become apartments. The ground floor transforms into shared space, co-working areas, small events, maybe a coffee shop. The building pays for itself through rent, yet remains open to the public." The drawings are simple, almost minimal, but Jamal sees it clearly. The mansion is alive again. People lean on the polished marble staircase railing. Warm light pours through restored windows. The Holbrook House is still recognizable, but it pulses with life. "What does the timeline look like?" Maria asks, writing on her legal pad. She wants to know if demolition can be halted long enough to negotiate a purchase. Marcus answers, 18 months, maybe 2 years. It depends on financing and what we find inside. Jamal studies the sketches. This is more than hope. This is a working future, not a frozen relic.
"What do you need from us?" he asks. "Time," Marcus replies. "Time to assemble financing and a formal proposal. Can you slow the demolition long enough for an offer the current owner takes seriously?" Maria and Catherine exchange a measured look. "We can try," Catherine says. "Great Lakes Storage has momentum, counting on silence." "Then we move quickly too," Marcus says. That evening, Jamal walks Woodward Avenue as the sun dips behind the buildings. He stops in front of the boarded-up mansion. For the first time in months, maybe years, he allows himself to imagine it restored. The house is silent. Plywood still blocks windows. Stone walls bear stains and cracks. But in his mind, light streams behind the glass. People come and go. The marble staircase gleams under careful polish. History isn't trapped behind ropes. It lives again, a place for people to gather, work, and remember.
Tuesday afternoon, City Council chambers. Public comment on the demolition proposal. Jamal arrives early with Catherine and Maria. Marcus is already there, dressed in a suit, portfolio under his arm. They take the front row. The room fills slowly. A few preservationists, neighbors, a local TV reporter. The council members enter. Routine items pass. Zoning variances, street repairs. Then, item 7B, demolition proposal for 4510 Woodward Avenue. A city planner speaks. The structure has been vacant since 1987 with multiple code violations. Great Lakes Storage Solutions has submitted a plan to demolish the mansion and construct a climate-controlled storage facility. The project will generate tax revenue and remove a blighted property. Public comment opens. Maria rises. She speaks with authority. Holbrook House's historical significance, the 1970s architectural survey, thousands of petition signatures. Then Marcus presents. Sketches across the table. Adaptive reuse plan. Apartments above, public space below. He's ready to purchase if granted 60 days to secure financing. The council listens politely, curious but not hopeful. Then Great Lakes Storage's representative speaks. Smooth, professional, almost sympathetic. He acknowledges the mansion's history, thanks preservationists, then pivots. The structure is dangerous. Restoration costs are prohibitive. The company has invested heavily in plans and engineering reports.
The city urgently needs tax revenue and visible development. Nostalgia is, he implies, a luxury Detroit cannot afford. No vote is taken. The council moves on. Outside, Maria's expression is tight. That didn't go well. They're going to approve it, aren't they? Probably, she says. Great Lakes has connections, past city projects. Unless they find leverage, this will pass. Marcus checks his phone, frowns. I'll make some calls. I'll be in touch. His easy coffee shop confidence is replaced by calculation, the quiet math of a developer who knows when the odds have shifted. Jamal drives alone to Woodward Avenue. Across from the mansion, the orange notice is tacked to the fence. Official city seal, notice of pending demolition. Below, a 30-day timeline. He sits in his car, engine off. Fading light falls over the mansion. All the research, all the signatures, Marcus's plans. Years of tours, stories, memories. None of it feels enough. Then the phone rings. Unknown number. He almost lets it go to voicemail. "Jamal, this is your Aunt Patricia," a voice says. His stomach drops. She never calls just to chat. "It's your grandmother," she continues, voice tight. "We are at Detroit Receiving." The weight of the city, the street, the mansion, and now family, presses down. Jamal grips the steering wheel. The world he's been trying to save, the lives, the stories, the buildings, feels suddenly more fragile than ever. And yet, in that fragility, a spark remains. The Holbrook house still stands. The petition still grows. Marcus still believes in adaptive reuse. History,
is not yet erased. Jamal takes a deep breath, eyes shifting from the notice to the silent stone facade. Every boarded-up window feels like a challenge, every crack a reminder. Preservation is not automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to step into battles no one else wants. Tonight, Woodward Avenue is quiet, but Jamal knows the fight is far from over. One phone call, one petition, one adaptive reuse plan. These are small threads that might weave the mansion's future. The street remembers its wealth, its labor, its losses, and perhaps, with a few stubborn people willing to act, it can learn how to become something more than it was. The marble staircase, the oak paneling, the carved details, they may yet witness life again. People walking, living, creating inside walls that have held memory for over a century. Not just a monument to the past, but a working, breathing part of Detroit's present. Jamal shuts off the engine, steps out. The evening wind carries the faint scent of asphalt and old stone. The street is quiet, the city waiting. And in the distance, the mansion rises, defiant and silent, holding its breath for what comes next. "Can you come?" His aunt's voice is urgent. Jamal is already starting the engine. The hospital is downtown, 15 minutes away, but he makes it in 10. Inside, the emergency waiting area hums with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of worried conversations. His father, 2 aunts, and his younger sister sit together. His grandmother is stable, they tell him. Hip fracture, possibly more damage. At 87, every fall carries weight. He sits, waits. Somewhere nearby, a phone plays local news quietly, a segment on development proposals and city budget shortfalls. The irony is not lost on him. His father sits beside him. For a long moment, neither speaks. Then,
"You've been fighting for that building?" his father asks. "Yeah," Jamal admits. "I think we're going to lose." His father nods slowly. "Your grandmother used to clean houses near there. Different street, same kind of place. She always said those mansions were built like fortresses, like nothing could ever knock them down." "They're knocking them down anyway," Jamal whispers. Silence falls again. Monitors beep and hum. Machines keep people alive inside a building that once might have been someone's grand house, now a medical facility. Jamal stares out at the city lights. Somewhere in the dark, the Holbrook house waits. Boards over windows, notice tacked to the fence, waiting for demolition, waiting to become another vacant lot on a street already scarred by absence and memory. He feels the weight of losing 2 things he cannot control, the building and perhaps his grandmother. Rain falls, soft and persistent on a Thursday night. 3 weeks since the hospital, 2 weeks until demolition. His grandmother is home, recovering slowly. Hip surgery was successful, but she is smaller somehow, as if part of her strength stayed behind on the operating table. Stairs are now a team effort. Short walks leave her exhausted. Most days, she sits in her favorite chair by the window, memorizing every detail of a neighborhood that refuses to stop changing. Jamal knows he should be with her, with his family, but tonight he needs to be somewhere else, somewhere alive, a building that survived the fight. He parks along Woodward, steps into the rain, and walks toward the only surviving palace on the block, the old mansion-turned-restaurant, the Millionaire's Table. Inside, warmth greets him. Soft light glows on wood and plaster. The architecture has been respected, original woodwork polished, restored plaster moldings tracing the ceilings. The grand staircase curves like a spine of carved oak. This is history you can inhabit,
not stare out behind glass. Jamal takes a quiet table in a corner, orders coffee, closes the menu, and listens to the low murmur of conversation.
An older waiter approaches. Silver hair, steady movements, the grace of someone who has carried plates and stories through these rooms for decades. "Rough night?" he asks. "Rough month," Jamal replies before softening it. The waiter nods, eyes flicking to the rain-streaked windows. "You're the one fighting for the Holbrook house." Jamal looks up, startled. "How did you know?" "Saw you on the news," the waiter says. "My cousin sent me the petition. Said, look, somebody is trying to save one of the old bones on Woodward." He gestures vaguely. "This place was almost gone too back in the early 70s. Office tenants left. Owner couldn't find replacements. Empty for nearly 2 years. "What changed?" Jamal asks. The waiter glances around, then pulls out the chair across from Jamal, easing into it with the caution of old knees, but the pride of experience. "A small group bought it," he begins. "Not a big company. A chef who wanted a restaurant, an architect who couldn't stand seeing another mansion die, a banker who figured they might not go broke. They scraped together savings, took loans they probably shouldn't have." He points upward. Plaster falling in sheets. The staircase had rot. Took months to stabilize. They rebuilt it piece by piece using old pictures, old plans where they could. Could have been cheaper to drywall the whole place, make it modern, but they didn't. "Did they make money?" Jamal asks, quietly. The waiter smiles wryly. "Not for a long time. Took nearly a decade before the light stayed on and the building stopped bleeding. But that light, that's what they cared about most."
Jamal looks around, seeing it through the story, the restored details, the balance of old bones and new life, servers weaving between tables, birthdays celebrated, couples on first dates beneath a ceiling that has survived nearly a century, a building that once teetered on the edge of erasure now alive, filled with people and laughter. "The Holbrook house," he says softly. 2 weeks from now we fought. We had plans, a developer ready to take a risk, but the storage company, money, connections, they got there first. We lost." The waiter pauses, considering. Then, quietly, deliberately, "You can't save everything. If you try, it will break you. But you save what you can." He taps the table lightly, emphasizing the point. "This one standing," he says with a glance around the room, "is enough sometimes." Jamal sits back, letting it sink in. The rain patters outside. The city waits. Boards cover the windows of the Holbrook house, notice still tacked to the fence, but inside, the memory of the Millionaire's table shines like a warning and a promise. Some stories, some buildings can survive if people refuse to let them vanish quietly. He thinks of his grandmother, of his city, of the street that once pulsed with wealth and now holds only fragments. He thinks of adaptive reuse, of petitions that drew thousands of voices online. Even in loss, there is proof that effort matters, that resistance, however small, leaves a mark. Jamal takes a slow sip of coffee, the warmth grounding him. Around him, people eat, talk, laugh. Life inside old walls, restored walls, teaching him that preservation is not only about architecture, it is about community, memory, and the persistence of hope. And outside, on Woodward Avenue, the Holbrook house waits, silent, threatened, a reminder that history is fragile and that sometimes all you can do is fight for what you can and honor what you've already saved.
It matters, not just for architecture enthusiasts, but for everyone who works here, eats here, gets married in the ballroom upstairs. They may not know every historical fact, but they remember the feeling of the place that lingers.
Jamal pushes his chair back, ready to stand. Sometimes victory isn't about stopping every wrecking ball. Sometimes it's making sure that when they finish swinging, at least something important remains, even if it is only one mansion left from 20. He leaves the restaurant, alone with his cooling coffee. Rain falls in a steady rhythm, each drop racing down the glass. He thinks of his grandmother, seated by her window, memorizing her block before it changes again. He recalls his father's stories of the houses his grandfather wired, knowing every hidden cable run and wall without ever entering through the front door. He remembers all the nights he stood on Woodward Avenue, pointing at empty lots, saying, "This is where something used to be." Perhaps that has been the mistake, building a career on loss, on ghosts, on outlines in the air, instead on the stubborn, ordinary work of keeping survivors alive. The Holbrook house is probably already beyond saving. The paperwork is moving, the notice is on the fence, but there are other houses, other blocks, other fights that are not yet lost by default. Jamal pays the bill, steps back into the rain, and pauses on the sidewalk. He turns, taking in the full facade of the Millionaire's table, the mansion that survived, the one that proves survival is possible if someone stays loud, foolish, and brave long enough.
Across the street, the Holbrook house sits dark behind its chain-link fence, boarded windows, wet stone, still standing for now. Jamal pulls out his phone, scrolling through contacts, preservation groups, journalists, former tour guests who ask to be kept in the loop. He starts making calls. If he is going to lose this one, he wants to lose it fighting. And he wants to make sure that when the walls finally come down, the city cannot pretend it never knew what stood there. The calls lead somewhere unexpected. Not a last-minute rescue, not a miracle court order, but to something quieter, something that might last longer than any single brick wall. Catherine meets him the next morning at her office. The room is familiar. File boxes, old posters from past campaigns, stacks of research. But she moves with more energy than usual, a spark that comes from a lifetime of small victories instead of dramatic headline-grabbing wins. "I've been thinking about your petition," she says, waving him toward a chair. 15,000 signatures, thousands of comments from people who remember these houses. That is not nothing. "It was not enough to save the building," Jamal says, the words tasting flat. "No," she agrees, "but it's enough to do something else." She opens her laptop and turns it toward him. On the screen glows a rough digital map of Woodward Avenue, interactive, color-coded by time period. Every dot marks a mansion that once stood along Millionaire's Row. "We build a living archive. Every house, every photograph, every floor plan when we can find it, architectural details, stories from families who lived there, stories from the people who worked there, your grandmother's memories, all of it in one place." Jamal leans closer, tracing the avenue with his eyes. Click a dot, a photograph, a story. Another dot, a different house, a different voice. "Who pays for this?" he asks.
"We do," she says. "The Preservation Alliance. They have been tucking away small grant money for a project like this. Once built, teachers can use it, researchers, tour guides. It stops being just a protest tool. It becomes a resource." Maria arrives a minute later, still in her coat, carrying coffee and a folder stuffed with notes. She sets it down, pulls out a chair. "I talked to someone at Wayne State University," she says. "They'll host the site on their servers. They like that we're not only telling stories about marble staircases, but also the people who cleaned those staircases. Working-class narratives next to architectural history. Both matter." The project takes shape over the following weeks. Jamal becomes the lead researcher almost by accident. He knows the street best, having spent years walking its length with a microphone in hand. Now he returns to the archives with new purpose, not to gather ammunition for one fight, but to document an entire vanished world. Long days at the Detroit Public Library, the Burton Historical Collection, and the Walter P. Ruther Library at Wayne State University become routine. He digs out photographs of mansions demolished in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, tracks down addresses, cross-checks them against fire insurance maps, and plots their footprints on the digital woodward. He begins interviewing people. His grandmother, on a good day, blanket over her knees, tea cooling on the side table, talks into his recorder. She remembers riding the bus up Woodward in the 1950s, pressing her forehead to the glass to see mansions slip by. She recalls working in similar houses in Boston Edison, Indian Village, where rules were strict, unspoken. Back doors only, no sitting in certain rooms, eyes lowered when guests were present. Small humiliations, occasional kindnesses, the way money could make a house feel both beautiful and cold. Jamal records every word. Later, he plays the audio at half speed, fingers flying across the keyboard as he transcribes. Her stories sit in the archive alongside architectural surveys, given equal weight.
He tracks down descendants of families who once lived on Millionaire's Row. A woman in Ann Arbor, whose grandfather owned an automotive parts company, recalls winter balls filling the society pages. Another in Detroit remembers her grandmother cleaning houses on the street, speaking of grandeur and impossibility, of the feeling of wealth and exclusion. Each story adds layers, people, lives, and voices, not just buildings. Every interview, every photograph, every map becomes part of a growing digital living memory. The archive preserves not just structures, but the human heartbeat of the street, the rhythms of daily life, the small joys and quiet indignities that make history real. By the end of weeks, the project grows beyond Jamal's expectations. Teachers can guide students through virtual tours of a street that no longer exists. Researchers can overlay historical maps with modern imagery. Tourists and locals alike can click through mansions long vanished, understanding what was lost and why. It becomes a testament to endurance, a repository for stories the city might otherwise forget. Jamal steps back from his screen, taking a slow breath. Outside, the rain has stopped. The city hums with lights and distant traffic. Somewhere on Woodward, the Holbrook house still waits. It may still fall. It may never be restored. But the new archive ensures it and all its lost neighbors will not disappear from memory. Their presence lingers in pixels, photographs, and stories, keeping alive the pulse of a street that shaped a city, even as it vanished piece by piece. History, Jamal realizes, is not only about saving walls and staircases, it is about saving memory, connection, and understanding, and that, perhaps, is the fight that matters most. A man in California reaches out, his great-aunt having married into one of the Woodward families decades ago. She had carefully saved boxes of letters, holiday photographs, and brittle documents that survived countless moves. He sends Jamal scans, stiff, formal portraits on marble steps, children in sailor suits on manicured lawns, handwritten invitations on heavy paper edged in gold. Each image is a window into a world that no longer exists. Jamal tracks down former residents from the era after the mansions were carved into apartments. A man recalls renting a room in the Holbrook house in 1975, paying just $40 a month, listening to the building creak and settle at night like an old ship caught in a storm. A woman remembers living in the Henderson mansion when it served as a boarding house for nurses in the 1960s. She speaks of drafty windows, a shared kitchen, and the faint trace of painted ceilings beneath cheap whitewash. Each voice, each memory becomes a dot on the map, a click, a story. By early spring, the first version of the project goes live. The interface is simple, clean, and intuitive. No clutter, no distractions. Open the map, zoom in on Woodward Avenue, and tap any point to see what once stood there, then and now. Photographs, basic architectural details, short text summaries, and audio clips play directly on the page. A nurse describing her cold room under cracked plaster ceilings. Jamal's grandmother recalling bus rides at dawn. A descendant reading from a 1912 letter. Jamal records a walkthrough himself. He walks the street with his phone, camera pointed at empty lots and surviving buildings, narrating what used to line each side.
The recording becomes the audio guide for walking tours, allowing teachers and tourists to trace the street as it once was. Within weeks, educators adopt the site. A high school history class in Detroit maps how redlining and freeway construction sliced through their own neighborhoods, using Millionaire's Row as a starting point. An architecture professor at the University of Michigan requires the site as pre-lecture viewing, illustrating urban decline and adaptive reuse. Local media picks up the story again, not with splashy headlines, but with thoughtful features. The Detroit Free Press runs a piece examining the history and memory of Woodward Avenue. Public radio airs a 10-minute segment where Jamal and Catherine discuss memory maps and the question of who gets to decide what counts as history. Preservation circles across the country share the story. Soon, messages arrive from Buffalo, Cleveland, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, cities with streets facing the same slow erasure. They ask how the site was built, how interviews were conducted, how they might replicate the model for their own disappearing neighborhoods. The idea proves simple to copy: clear structure, accessible tools, and a commitment to recording everyone's story, not just those whose names appear on deeds. Jamal adds a user submission feature. A button on each page invites people to upload photographs, letters, or recorded memories. Slowly, the archive fills with snapshots from family albums and audio captured at kitchen tables. The map ceases to be just Jamal's project or Catherine's. It becomes a shared repository, capable of growth long after the Holbrook house is gone. One evening, his grandmother listens to her own voice on the website. Jamal plays the clip from his laptop, her recollections of polished banisters, strict house rules, and the feeling of walking past Woodward mansions, knowing she would never enter through the front door.
She sits quietly as it ends. "That's good," she says. "People should know this, not just the pretty parts, the whole story." Jamal closes the laptop and sits beside her. Outside, spring light fades over their block. Cars pass. A siren wails in the distance, then fades. The demolition of the Holbrook house is scheduled for the following week. He is not forgotten. The thought weighs heavy, but the burden feels different now. Loss is still real, still wrong, but it is no longer a clean eraser. Even if the building falls, its outline remains on the map, its stories preserved in voices, photographs, and text. The old Millionaire's Row may be gone, but a new one, made of memory, data, and stubborn care, is beginning to take its place. The demolition date arrives, passes, and is reset. Great Lakes Storage has the permits. The equipment is booked. On paper, everything is ready, yet something in the air has shifted. The petition, the news coverage, the drone footage, and the new digital archive have changed the dynamics. Jamal receives a call from Marcus. "They want to meet," Marcus says. "Who?" Jamal asks. "Great Lakes," Marcus replies. "The city is pushing back. Your petition and the media coverage made this messy. They're asking if there's a middle ground." The meeting is held in a downtown conference room, neutral territory. Bright lights, generic art on the walls. A serene photograph of water hangs at the center of the table. The Great Lakes representative is the same smooth professional from the council hearing, but his tone has softened, less confident, more cautious. "We have invested heavily in this project. We cannot simply abandon it, but we are open to creative solutions." Marcus lays out new sketches, sliding them across the polished table. He explains, "You keep your storage facility, but we preserve the mansion's front facade, the entrance hall, the marble staircase."
The new construction wraps around what survives. Those spaces become a lobby and a small museum-style public area. Storage units go behind and above. The representative studies the drawings, tracing lines with his finger. This will increase construction costs significantly. By maybe 15%, Marcus answers. In return, you qualify for historic preservation tax credits. You gain good press instead of negative attention. You end up with a building with character, not another anonymous box. Maria leans forward, legal pad open. You also avoid a lawsuit, she adds, because we will file one. We know it's weak, but it will buy time. Delay costs money. Investors don't like uncertainty. The room settles into quiet calculation. The law may not favor preservation, but time does. Delay forces negotiation, opens space for compromise, and sometimes, just sometimes, saves part of a city's history. For Jamal, this moment crystallizes everything he has learned. Victory is rarely absolute. Sometimes it is partial, imperfect. Sometimes it is about making sure that something, anything, survives. Preservation is not always about holding back the wrecking ball. It is about bending it around the stories, the voices, the memories that must endure. He leaves the room with Marcus and Maria, the sketches safely tucked under arm. Outside, the city is alive with movement. Rain has faded into damp streets reflecting early evening light. Somewhere along Woodward, the Holbrook house still waits. Its ultimate fate is uncertain, but the fight has shifted. It is no longer entirely lost. The archive is growing. The memories are being captured. The voices, once ephemeral, now have permanence. And even if the mansion eventually falls, its story, its lessons, and its place on the map will remain, shaping how the next generation understands what was here and why it mattered. In the end, the work is never over. There will always be more houses, more stories, more streets at risk. But Jamal walks away with a renewed purpose: to document, to preserve, to amplify. Because even one saved mansion or one captured memory can inspire the next fight, and in that persistence, history survives. The negotiation does not end in a single day. It stretches over weeks. Emails, revised drawings, quiet pressure from city officials who want to avoid another public fight. Piece by piece, a compromise begins to take shape. Great Lakes agrees to preserve the entire street-facing facade and the entrance hall. Marcus pushes and wins the main marble staircase plus one original interior room, the former library with its carved oak panels. These elements will be stabilized, restored, and folded into the new structure. The rest of the mansion will come down. The storage facility will still rise behind it, but the building will no longer be a clean slate. As part of the deal, Great Lakes agrees to fund a permanent historical display in the entrance hall. Large photographs, clear text panels, and QR codes connect directly to Jamal's digital archive. Anyone dropping off boxes will walk past the story of the street, the families who lived here, the workers who maintained these homes, the redlining and suburban flight that helped destroy the corridor. It is not the full restoration Jamal had dreamed of, but it is not a total erasure either. Demolition begins in late spring. Jamal visits often, camera around his neck, standing behind the safety fence. Crews work carefully around the sections that will remain. Steel braces cradle the facade. The entrance hall is shored up from the inside. The staircase is wrapped and protected. The rest of the mansion is taken down in controlled stages, roof first, upper floors next, then the partitions that once divided a single family's mansion into dozens of rented rooms.
Jamal photographs everything. The exposed cross-sections of old walls, the pattern of joists and beams, the sky opening where ceilings once were. He also documents the restoration work, stone cleaning,
Patching, the way the new structure rises behind old stone. Each stage becomes part of the archive. The end of the house is now part of its own story. By fall, the hybrid building begins to make sense. A modern storage facility stands where most of the mansion once rose, but the historic front still faces woodward. The entrance hall glows at night. The marble staircase curves upwards just inside the glass doors. At first, the contrast is jarring. Then it becomes oddly compelling, a visible argument between past and present that neither side fully wins. The opening takes place on a cold November afternoon. Speeches, cameras, city officials in coats, neighborhood residents curious to see what survived, and preservationists who still wrestle with mixed feelings all fill the room. Great Lakes has executed the historical display well. Large photographs of Millionaire's Row in its prime line the walls. Text panels explain what once stood here, who lived and worked in the houses, and how redlining and suburban flight contributed to their decline. Jamal's digital archive is everywhere. QR codes beneath each panel, a small screen looping interviews. At one station, his grandmother's voice plays, describing the mansions she passed on the bus and the homes she cleaned in other wealthy districts. Visitors stand, some close their eyes, absorbing the past through memory and sound. Children race up and down the restored marble staircase, sliding their hands along the polished railing. Parents read the plaques, marveling at the care taken to preserve what remains. At the service desk, a line forms as people sign contracts for storage units surrounded by the story of the building they are now using. Commerce wrapped in memory, practical use interwoven with grief. It is not an empty lot.
Jamal stands in the entrance hall with his grandmother at his side. She is stronger now, cane in hand, coat buttoned to the chin. She looks up at the ceiling, at the restored plaster, at the staircase that survived fire, abandonment, and nearly a bulldozer. "It is not the same," she says. "No," Jamal agrees, "it is not, but it is something." She reaches out, resting her palm on the cool marble. "My mother used to clean houses with staircases like this. She never imagined one of her great-grandchildren would stand in a place like this and be thanked for helping to keep it here." Jamal follows her gaze to a bronze plaque near the entrance. Building Historic Entrance and Library preserved through the efforts of the Detroit Preservation Alliance, Jamal Williams, and community supporters. The words feel too big for what still feels like losing more than winning. A fragment saved, most of the house gone. A week later, Jamal leads his next tour, but this time he does not gesture toward a fenced-off ruin or scraped dirt. He brings his group inside. They walk up the marble staircase, stand beneath the old ceiling, and listen to audio clips from the archive. Jamal points to the places where new walls meet old stone and explains why this compromise exists. The building is alive again, different, hybrid, not what it was, but not nothing on a street now defined by gaps and absences. That is no small thing. Spring returns. Trees bud along Woodward Avenue. Jamal leads an evening tour, 15 people this time, larger than usual. Word has spread about the archive, the preserved entrance hall, and the small victory on a street that almost disappeared.
They start at the hybrid building. The group climbs the marble staircase, fingers grazing the rail that has endured 3 different centuries. They pause at the historical panels. Someone asks if the building is haunted. Jamal smiles softly. "Only by memory," he says, "which might be more powerful." Stepping back onto Woodward, the group walks north past empty lots. Jamal no longer gestures vaguely at open space. He pulls out his tablet, taps the digital map. Before and after photographs fill the screen.
He names the families who lived there, tells the stories of the workers who cleaned rooms, wired walls, trimmed hedges, owners and staff, side by side, not one without the other. They reach the Millionaire's table. The restaurant glows in the dusk, warm light pouring from tall windows. Shadows move in the old ballroom upstairs. This one survived whole, Jamal says, saved and reused in the 1970s. It proves these buildings can have second lives if someone fights long enough and hard enough. The tour ends as it always does, but something has changed. Jamal no longer closes on pure loss. He closes with an invitation. This was the richest street in Detroit. Most of it is gone. What remains are fragments, a staircase, a restaurant, a few carved panels, photographs in an archive, stories people like my grandmother were willing to tell. He looks at the faces in the fading light, students, tourists, locals who drove in from the suburbs to see what used to be here. The real dark story, he says, is not that these buildings fell. Buildings fall everywhere. The real darkness is how easy it is to forget they were ever here, to forget who built them, who maintained them, who got pushed aside when the money moved. That forgetting, that is the crime.
A woman near the front lifts her phone. "Can we share the archive?" she asks. "Please," Jamal says, "that is exactly why it exists." The montage that follows is quiet and gentle. Spring light filters through restored windows at the Millionaire's table. Workers on lifts clean and repoint the hybrid building's stone facade. Jamal's grandmother sits at her window, wrapped in a cardigan, watching the neighborhood as if reading a book she knows by heart. Students on a field trip stand in the preserved entrance hall, listening through headphones to voices from decades ago. The past and present coexist. Memory and modern life intersect. A street that was nearly erased now survives in fragments, in stories, in the quiet persistence of people who refuse to look away. Even amidst loss, even in compromise, something endures. Teachers trace routes on old redlining maps, showing students how colors shaped their city. Children run their hands along marble carved before their great-grandparents were born. In other preserved districts, Boston Edison, Indian Village, entire blocks survive because someone recognized history in time. Painters refresh porch trim. Gardeners prune rose bushes planted generations earlier. Quiet, ongoing work keeps history from slipping into dust.
Jamal records a final entry for the archive. His voice is steady, deliberate. "We did not save everything," he says. "We saved pieces. For now, that has to be enough, because that is what we have." He pauses, choosing the next words with care. The question was never only about one street in Detroit. It is about what we choose to remember, and who gets to be remembered. The wealthy families, yes, but also my grandmother on the bus, my great-grandfather inside the walls, pulling wire. Everyone whose hands touched these buildings and made them real. A last image lingers in his mind. Evening on Woodward Avenue. The hybrid building glows from within, its old stone front holding steady against a new glass body. Across the street, the restaurant shines like a lantern. Between them, empty lots where young trees push up through the soil, slowly reclaiming space that once held mansions. On the sidewalk, a small group walks with phones raised, following the digital map, headphones on, listening to the past step by step. They learn the true cost of every palace ever built, the human labor, the stories of loss and resilience. They see how easy it is to forget and how fragile memory can be, but also how stubborn care can keep it alive. In that quiet, glowing street, history is not just preserved, it is living, teaching, and breathing, one fragment at a time.